All right, here we go. Hey, welcome guys to another episode of the Gedunk podcast. We are less than 24 hours removed from the end of the NCAA basketball team. The Florida Gators pulled it out against Houston. Great weekend of basketball. Super, competitive. We had comebacks. This is one of the best Final Fours I think I've ever seen, honestly. What did you think, Bobby?
Yeah, it was very compelling. The lesson learned for anybody, any kid that's watching is you have to finish the game. So you had Duke eliminated because they couldn't finish. You had Houston lose the national championship because they did not finish. And it goes to show you can be ranked, you can be all this, you can do everything right 99% of the time. But if that last 1% is not done correctly, you will lose. You can lose in a competitive environment.
I saw something. I didn't realize this. It wasn't apparent to me watching the game, but I guess Duke didn't have a field goal for like the last 10 minutes. They had some free throws and stuff like that, but they were in a real drought, man. I don't know how you feel, Bobby. I've always sort of been impressed with people who are like, they can just play and they can just finish. I think of it in terms of like MMA and jiu-jitsu and boxing, like people who don't lose focus, the ability to concentrate on what you're doing in a sports setting, whatever sport it is. There's so many times in a boxing ring, even sparring, not even necessarily in fights, where for a brief second or two, you kind of like lose you're not constant, for a second you think, man, how much time's left in the round or whatever, and then you get hit. And it's sort of universally true. You've got to maintain that focus, and he or she who maintains the focus longer is oftentimes going to be the winner regardless of skill.
That's a very good point. There's a lull in every athletic contest, like where people have settled in, this, that, and the other, and whoever takes advantage during the lull usually is the one that wins. And then towards the end of any contest, especially at a championship level, there is, as Ahmad Rashad put it when talking about Michael Jordan, winning time.
Yeah.
There's winning time, and people will say it's being clutch, it's being this, and it takes a good player to being a great player to being an all-time player. So for example, the comparison of Michael Jordan versus LeBron James. LeBron James statistically is going to destroy Michael because of the longevity and the high level performance for such a long time. However, hold on. No. I'm just saying that's the argument. However, in my opinion, Michael Jordan is the greatest of all time because of that clutch area that we're talking about. He never let the NBA finals go to a game 7. Never.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
He was in the finals 6 times. 6 times he was the MVP. Okay. And in that time period of him winning those championships, he went through basically the entire dream team. He went through basically the best to play the game and denied some other Hall of Fame players their ability to win a championship. That is because of the clutch gene. We all knew who was getting the ball when the game was in doubt for the Chicago Bulls in the 90s. You knew it. And in his thing, it didn't matter. Could you stop him?
It was Steve Kerr.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, wait,
yeah.
No, Paxton hit a shot too, I think.
John Paxson in that first run and Steve Kerr in the second run. What's interesting to me though, like debates like right now, Eli Manning is coming up for consideration for the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
And what are your thoughts on that?
I think he's a Hall of Famer because in football, out of every other sport, it's not about statistics. It's about that clutch factor. And in the 2 times that man was in the Super Bowl, he's only got to beat Tom Brady twice in the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And each one of those games, there was a clutch moment. A clutch moment where you're like, oh my gosh, how did he do that? Forget the regular season statistics. That's what got him over. Joe Namath is a perfect example of that. The Jets won the Super Bowl. He's a Hall of Famer, not because of his career numbers, but because of it was the greatest sports upset in the history of football at that time.
Yeah.
Right. And it legitimized the AFL, which was seen as a bastardized league. right? And it created the modern NFL. That's a clutch moment. And so when you look at, I'll take it to the military, when you look at most of your Congressional Medal of Honor award recipients, it's a clutch thing that they did. It wasn't the long sustained campaigns. That's not to say there hadn't been awardees that have been over the course of time and stuff like that. But like 90% of your Medal of Honor winners were for clutch moments and clutch decisive battles. That's how important it is doing the right thing at the right time.
You know, with the sorry, I can talk today, the CMH guys, you know, one thing that is a truth about those situations, I would say the majority of them, um, probably not all, but the majority of them, like somebody fucked up, right? And you know, that's how they ended up in that situation, whether it was, you know, what happened at Fob Keating, or, you know, the Outpost, if you've seen the movie, or a lot of times the reason it's necessary for someone to go above and beyond and do this incredible act of bravery is because you're in deep shit, and there's and many times you're in deep shit because somebody made a mistake.
Bingo.
Yeah.
And they have to recover from it, and it takes a Herculean heroic action to put things right, you know, and many times at the cost of the individual doing it. So this is why sports resonates so much to people, because there are real life applications to it. It's not good enough to be good consistently. You also have to be good when it matters the most. And so when people ask,
lessons. Yeah.
Right. And when people ask, why does the military train so hard? Because we don't know what that situation is going to be. However, we want to be as prepared as possible to meet the moment. Meet the moment. And in the Final Four, on the men's side, you saw that. You saw teams that met the moment, even when it looked like it was bleak, because both Houston and Florida should have lost their semifinal games, right? But they pushed through. And then when Houston was up, double digits almost with 3 minutes to go, something like that, Florida was like, look, man, we went through the crucible of the SEC that had 14 teams in this tournament. Mm-hmm. We're going to execute until the final whistle. And at the end of the day, they were not uncomfortable in the clutch moment. Houston was.
And I think that's one of the things. Be curious your take. You know, one of the things, you know, I've got kids, right? And my kids play sports, and you know, you talk about the lessons that you learn from sports, right? And people often will say, well, you got to practice, you know, you got to do hard work. You know, it teaches you discipline. It teaches you these things. And the flip side of that argument is you can get those things from sort of other things too, right? Like if you play the piano, you have to be disciplined. You have to work hard. You have to, you have to be able to perform under the spotlight. All of those things sort of apply, but the difference to me, the thing that sports do that is different than any other activity, and these are great activities. You know, I love STEM stuff, right? I love the chess club, love the piano, all these things, but sports teaches you how to compete in a way that if you're, you know, the lead in the school play, you know, you can argue maybe you competed to get that role or what have you, but you're not going against somebody else. You're not learning to compete. You're not learning how to beat someone, you know, how to give the other fella hell kind of thing, right? And so I think you only get that from sports.
I agree, especially as a young person.
Yes.
The iron sharpens iron mentality, right? Of being able to critically think against an opponent. And guess what? Both people who participate elevate their performance, their levels of thinking in real time. I tell people all the time, the biggest preparation that I had for the global war on terrorism and 22 years of military service was playing Navy football. Period. And people ask why. This is why sports is such a big deal at the Service Academies, is because we recognize over 100 years ago, the practical application of competing and having to make adjustments when your first plan does not work, and then enduring and having the resilience to continue to victory is the primary backbone of the United States military. Douglas MacArthur said it on on these friendly fields of strife, we sow the victory, the seeds of victory and war. I mean, it's very accurate. I thought it was a bunch of BS when we showed up to school. But dude, when you're playing, I don't know, Notre Dame, and the guy across from you outweighs you by 85 to 100 pounds, and you're like, my job is to still stop this guy from doing the job. And you're like, I don't have the resources. I'm not as fast. I'm not as strong, but I need to do something. Oh, you think leverage, timing, all of these other things that usually don't factor in. You take that planning process, the execution, and then you move it into the military sphere. Okay, we're supposed to deploy. We're supposed to be in this area. These things are supposed to happen. Oh, wait, the environment changed. The atmospherics changed. This, that, and the other changed. How do we reconfigure our plan to still execute the goal of the mission? Right? I can't tell you how many times that happened. And I think it's a skill set that's important.
Yeah, do you think there's something special about football? I know you're a football stan. We get it.
Yeah.
But is there, I would argue that football, so from somebody who never played football and never even played Pop Warner, football feels well, I wouldn't even say overrepresented, but in the military, there's a connection between American football and the American military.
Yes, very much so.
And is there something about that sport that you
I 100%, yes, I'm a stan, but I think yes, the answer is yes. So let's take a little history trip, right? World War I, World War II, those two specific wars, right? They also coincide with the rise of football in America, college football, and then professional football. Now, when World War I started, 1914, college football in particular was in its infancy, and it was dominated by the Ivy League schools and the Northeast Corridor schools.
And West Point, right?
And I was about to say, and West Point and Annapolis.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, Annapolis the Naval Academy won its only national championship in 1926, right after World War I. Okay? Keep all of that in mind. When you get to World War II and you see what America did, and you look at not just the guys that went to West Point and played football, but the guys that went to Annapolis and played football, but anybody that played college football or was part of college football, all over the place as far as Medal of Honor recipients, Silver Stars, Navy Crosses. It's uncharacteristically unbalanced, especially when you look at, say, naval aviation. A lot of academy guys have played football, but a lot of OCS guys. There was a guy that won the Heisman named Kinnick. He won it in 1940, I want to say 2, out of the University of Iowa. Okay. Was awarded the Medal of Honor. He was shot down during World War II. The high school at Yokosuka is named after him. Heisman Trophy winner. Okay. When you look at what happened after that war, after World War II, the continued rise of Notre Dame, the coaches that all were veterans that were epic. Bear Bryant was a commander in the Navy. Woody Hayes, a commander in the Navy. Paul Brown. When you look at these names, and unreal is a disproportionate number of them that were in the Navy vice the Army. And I think there's something to that too, because unlike the Army, and this is no knock on the Army, when you have your individual units, small units, 12-man platoon, companies, that's different than being on a 600-person ship that everybody has to act as one. That is a hard skill set to do, where if you're the captain, the lowest ranking deck seaman has to understand what you're doing, and there's 600 of you and you all act as one. So when you look at if you look at the greatest coaches of all time, all sports, football, basketball, baseball in American history, overwhelmingly they have military connections. Mike Krzyzewski at Duke was a West Point grad. Bobby Knight coached him at West Point. Okay, Bill Parcells was the head coach at Air Force. Bill Belichick was born and raised in Annapolis. His dad was on the football staff for 35 plus years at Annapolis. Vince Lombardi was the offensive coordinator at West Point. Tom Landry, former bomber pilot. Guess where he also coached? I mean, it's insane. The military connection, specifically with football in particular, but all sports that hammer hard.
You know, as an outside observer, right? I think football has something that makes it, you call in a play, right? And everyone has their individual job on that play. And so, if you're the guard, you're going to, I don't know, you're going to pull and you're going to block or whatever. And all these, all these things in a way that, for example, on a baseball field, you're the center fielder, you might shift over a little to the right because, the guy likes to pull it or whatever. But it's not sort of like, this is the play, this is what we're doing. It seems to translate pretty well to, I mean, basketball has plays, but they're not as scripted in a way
Right.
Football play is.
Right. And basketball, because there's so few people, you can have that one guy that just takes over and
Sure.
it's an impact.
Right.
As great as Tom Brady was as a quarterback, if his offensive line doesn't block for him, it don't matter.
Yeah.
It don't matter.
Right.
And so the reason I think football appeals to the American psyche is because it's a grit sport where it's going to hurt.
Yeah.
It's going to hurt. And at some point, you got to do the gut check and say, am I strong enough to compete against this person? That's number one. Number two is all 11 players on your team have to be on the same page. And it's not about who gets the glory. Because if the guy that's in the offensive line doesn't block, if the wide receiver doesn't block downfield, it doesn't matter.
Sure.
It is the ultimate team sport. And then the strategies and the evolution of thought that continuously happens in the sport. That's all sports, but it's so pronounced in football, especially, and I love the NFL, but at the college level, so many ways to do it. And the school, the institution that fields a team, a lot of it is reflected personality-wise on the team itself. So when you look at the service academies, Army, Navy, Air Force, we run that, archaic triple option or wing T stuff that's a throwback. Well, a lot of people will say that the personalities of the schools are throwbacks to a simpler time, this, that, and the other. However, those styles of offense that we run, you have to be extremely smart because you got to be able to adjust on the fly, and extremely tough because you're always going against people that outweigh you and are usually stronger than you. So you look for the small advantages. And if that's not the story, especially of the American Navy being the underdog all the time and rising to the occasion, I don't know what is. So when people ask me, why do sports matter? Why do high schools play it? Why do colleges play it? I say again, the most practical life lessons I've learned on what it means to be successful, how to prepare to be successful, and most importantly, how to endure challenges to be successful.
Not to mention, if you're a 16-year-old kid, you're an 18-year-old kid, you're a 23-year-old kid, you want to prove you're tough, man. At least I did. It's like, I want to show the world that I'm tough. And you can play football, or you can join a boxing gym, or you can just, shit post online and buy guns and,
Well, and that's the change that we're seeing, right? See, you got to understand, in less than 150 years in the American psyche, especially when dealing with men, you went from a generation of people who wanted to prove they were tough enough like their fathers to fight the Civil War, especially in the South. That's why college football grew so quickly here. Once we saw it was a way we could beat the North, it grew like hotcakes, right? And it was about who's toughest. And down here, south of the Mason-Dixon line, we believe we're tougher than the elites up north. Fact. And it mixes with this.
So, I mean, how cold does it get in Georgia, man? It was
right. I know, but the counter is, we're out here in 120 something, 110 degree heat sometimes running sprints in the summer, while up north people are up there in air conditioning. It's a mentality.
Crazy, man. I sometimes in the fall or early fall, like the kids are going back for football or whatever, they'll it'll be, I don't know, let's say it's 96 and humid or something, and it's a hot day, and they'll cancel my daughter's soccer practice or cross country or whatever. And I'm like, that would not fly in the South, man.
No, no.
Put an ice cube in your water bottle and
I,
get the
I
fuck
tell
outside.
people football weather to me is 92 degrees with a slight breeze. And so when I went up to Annapolis to play ball, it was interesting because when you get into November and it starts to get cold and the week of Army Navy and
Yeah,
that wind is coming off the bay, it's
yeah.
freezing. I'm looking around at people like this is insane. And my shipmates and classmates and teammates from Ohio and New York, they're like, hey man, this is football weather. I'm like, no, football weather was 3 months ago, bro. This right here makes no sense. But it is a mentality. It's a constant challenge. And so, I guess the way I look at it, when I ask people, why do you think sports matters? It usually comes out to pushing past what you believe is your normal limits,
Yep. Sure.
working together as a team and accomplishing a goal, right? And then individually asking yourself, how good or how great can I be? I be at something that is hard, that something everybody else is competing at. And I think, when you see something like a March Madness, when you see the NCAA tournament, men's and women's, part of the appeal is, okay, you are a mid-major school, you are a smaller school that you did not get the big time scholarship or the NIL money. But you got a shot right here to prove that you're just as good. I'll never forget when Steph Curry was in the tournament at Davidson and CJ
Yeah.
McCallum was at the tournament from Lehigh, and they were lit up Duke, Georgetown. They were like, you should have gave me a scholarship. And you
Yeah.
could tell CJ McCallum felt that way.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
looked at Krzyzewski every time he went down the court. He's like, you should have recruited me. You should have offered me. You
You
should have
know,
said that, it's great. You get to prove it.
yeah, and that's an interesting point. Like you get to, not only do young men kind of want to, you want to be tough, you want to show that you're a man or whatever, but like in certain sports you can prove it, right? And so you see that in martial arts a lot. And I'm not here to rip on, taekwondo or whatever. There's some taekwondo people who could probably kick my head off, but there are there are martial arts that um a lot of traditional martial arts, you're kind of learning various strikes, and it can be point sparring. So, you might go and spar, and then the second someone makes contact, you like reset, right? And so other martial arts like, boxing, Muay Thai kickboxing, MMA, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, these are sports where like you don't, it's not over if the first time you make contact, right? Like you're gonna keep going, right? And so these
Yeah.
are kind of more, not only they're more realistic because in a fighting context, in a self-defense context, but they're more realistic in they ask more of you, right? You get hit, but the play is not over, right?
Right.
Okay, you got hit. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah,
Right?
no, I can tell you, like boxing, it's required at the service academies for you to go
Yeah.
through boxing. And I'll never forget the first time I got tagged real hard. It was
What's
by
the guy's
Josh
name?
Stewart.
Josh.
Yeah.
His
So
guy's a
Josh,
triple jumper. He's
yeah,
hell,
triple jumper, six foot six
6'6",
guy
yeah.
with
Yeah.
range and reach, and he
Right.
tagged me hard. You can't hope the bell is going to ring because I'm like, this bell ain't coming anytime soon because he
Yeah.
tagged me immediately
Yep.
into the round. You gotta fight through it.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? And it's
Right.
different getting hit in boxing in the face as opposed to in football, right? Football you can anticipate it, you can do this. Boxing, it'll come out of nowhere. And he was like, boom! I was like, oh my gosh! And so as you coming to, you realize I can't pause. I have to defend myself, and at some point get back on the offensive, right? That is a hard concept for people nowadays because that's life.
Yeah.
It's life, whether we're talking about military, where we're talking about you're working in your neighborhood, you're working at your job, something unexpected happens and you can't hit the pause button. There is no reset. There is no reset. And I don't know if people today, especially young people today, are able to understand the concept of you have to recover while still pushing. And that is what I think sports brings to the table. And you can tell that mentality, especially from kids that play sports at a high level. They look at that differently. Now, the question is, do they translate that to the rest of their life?
I'll give you a direct example of, where this applied. Like, so when I was in Iraq, when I was in Fallujah, there was the whole battle was maybe 2 weeks or so. But the first night, well, it was actually my third night. So we had been out there a couple nights prior to the assault, and doing some stuff, and then we get into the city. The first night we go into the city, and we go in kind of with this Marine Corps company, and we'd been out there for a couple days calling in airstrikes and stuff like that, and then we're already tired, right? Like nobody's really slept more than half an hour in a night or two, and then we're going to the city. We kind of fight all night, and we're sort of coming in, and the sun's coming up, and it's literally day one, right, of Fallujah. But we've been up for 3 days, and there was a car bomb that went off maybe about 100 meters further into the city. And I remember, like, and I'm up on a rooftop, and I'm thinking to myself, and we're all up there, and I wasn't ever going to actually do this, but there was this little fantasy in my head of like, man, maybe we could just like, we're only 100 yards deep into the city. We could, maybe go out and kind of reinsert, and then, I was looking at the map, and there's still 3 miles to go to the other side of the city, and it was just this kind of like fantasy, right? It's like, man, I wish I didn't have to do this. But then it was like, well, that's just a fantasy. That's not what's going to happen. There's only one way out of this city, and it's straight ahead. And like that was something that it didn't directly come from sports, but it was rooted in that, right? It was rooted in like, man, it was rooted in, man, these guys are good, and we're in the first quarter and we're down by 15 already, but like, well, you got to play the last 3 quarters, man, and there's no way out, so you better fucking do something about it.
Right.
You know what I
Right.
mean?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's kind of funny that you say that. It may not be like from a direct sporting experience, but
Yeah.
it's a mentality. It's a
Exactly.
mindset.
Exactly.
And what I have noticed, right? Um, Even in sports today where it's so monetized, and people are like, okay, well, how bad or how hungry they are to win. That is a question that has come up in the last 15, 20 years that growing up we never heard before,
Yeah.
because the monetary incentive is so much. Okay, if I'm good at it, I'll do it because it makes me money. But we're now looking for athletes who would play the sport for free. They're that hungry to play, and that's what drives them to be great.
Mhm.
Kobe Bryant was that guy.
Yeah.
You didn't have to pay him a dime. He's like, I'm trying to kick your ass in this sport right here, right? Jordan, all this, which is different than, and this is no knock on the current crop of athletes, but they would rather team up with one another to make it easier to win than rather to compete separately and go through the crucible of building a championship team to win. So I'll give you an example. When we grew up in the 80s, it seemed like, using the NBA for an example, every NBA team had a star, at least one star. So in
Yeah.
Atlanta,
It's a
it was
star-driven league.
right, star-driven league. In Atlanta, we had Dominique Wilkins.
Yep.
Chicago had Jordan. The Celtics and the Lakers were the rarities that had multiple stars on a team, right? However, you did not see Charles Barkley try to leave Philadelphia to go join Larry Bird, or Dominique leaving Atlanta to go join Isaiah Thomas in Detroit. They wanted to win championships in their city and go through that crucible process, because to them, and Charles Barkley has talked about this extensively, to make it easier by combining with just other great players, where it's easier, it cheapens the victory. It cheapens the process of victory. Now, it costs them. Barkley did not win a championship. Patrick Ewing did not win a championship. Dominique did not win a championship. However, if you ask them today if they could go back and do it over, would they have done what a lot of stars do, like LeBron going to the Miami Heat? They will tell you no, because there's a process that makes this whole winning thing worth it.
Hey man,
And
as a Celtics fan,
yeah,
I'm gonna say I love it when the Lakers are the kings of this. The Lakers will get
yes,
like 5 people who are like. There was
yes.
one year they had like, they brought in like Rick Fox, and
Yep.
Shaq was like 104 years
And
old, and
Gary
like,
Payton and
yeah,
Karl Malone and all. I mean, it was like, a ridiculous Hall of Fame roster.
Yeah, and it was like, yeah, Karl Malone was on it too, right? And then like, it was everyone was like, oh, they're gonna win, and they didn't, and it was delicious. Same thing with Anthony Davis, right? I mean, yeah, I guess that works. I mean, it worked in Miami, but Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh and LeBron was the missing piece, obviously, but I don't know that, Dwayne Wade is, at that time was like a all
Well,
NBA guy. I mean,
well, he had won. No, he had won a championship without
yeah,
LeBron. I guess it goes to this mentality of I know I guess I'm old school in this. If a team drafted you to win in that city, then I want to stay in that city to win it. It's
yeah,
not about me, it's about that community.
yeah,
And as we've seen social media and everything, everybody's it went from what do you accomplish as a team to your individual legacy. And this is what makes it hard now for kids to consider a military career in this, that, and the other, because the first thing that's going to happen is your individuality, your individual recognition goes away. Goes away. So when you have a kid that could go to, say, a Princeton or an Air Force Academy, and let's say they can play a sport too, and this, that, and the other, guess what? You're going to go to the Air Force Academy, and they ain't going to give a damn about how great you were back home. They're not going to give a damn about promoting you so hey, you're part of the wing. That's all that matters. That's a lot for a lot of kids to swallow. If they know they could be making money, if they know they could get fame and recognition, that's the problem. And here's the thing, transitioning into what's happening currently with the current administration, the policies and this, that, and the other, the mentality now is not about serving your country. It's about how it looks when you do. And that is criminal to
explore
me.
that.
Well,
Okay, so just along these lines, you think back to World War II, you've got half Major League Baseball joins the army and goes to, fight the Nazis or whatever, right? And in our generation, I mean, there's Pat Tillman. Is there any, right?
yeah, Pat. I mean,
That's kind of
I,
it.
let me put it this way. I don't think Pat Tillman gets enough credit for what he was and what he represented.
Oh, he was the man. He was awesome.
I mean, I
Yeah,
think, and I think because of how he passed, that's why a lot of the army has diminished it. Because the bottom line, they fucked up.
of course.
Period.
Yeah.
Right. But I think Pat was the last of this mentality where it's never been about me, and that's our generation, to be honest with you, because
Yeah.
we had graduated, we're going and doing all this, and I'm like, well, Pat Tillman's an all-pro safety. What is he doing? I'll never forget. I was like, when I heard he was leaving the NFL, I was like,
Yeah. Yeah.
huh. He was the first guy to do that, if I recall, since like Rocky Blyer, who played for the Steelers in the 70s, who went to Vietnam. So Staubach
Oh,
went to Vietnam, Blyer
yep.
went to, and Blyer lost half a foot in Vietnam and came back and played for the Steelers, which is criminally an underrated story as well, right? So when I look at this transition to, okay, we're going to have a military, but the poster is what wins the war. What I mean by that is the publicity and how the military looks to this current administration is what they think will win the war or deter war from happening. If you go back, Ted Cruz famously tweeted out the Russian military video where they all looked all super tough, the Russian propaganda, and at the same time put it next to a private who had just graduated from boot camp, and she had two mothers. And he's like, who do you think is going to win the next war? Blah, blah, blah. Well, the Ukrainians proved you can have all the propaganda you want,
Man,
right?
it's so stupid, right? Like the give me the nerds, man. Every time, give me the
Trying to tell
nerds.
you. I'm
Give me the
trying to tell you.
nerds, give me the drones, and that's who's going to win the next war. It's not about how many push-ups you can do. It's never been about how many push-ups you can do. It wasn't about how many push-ups you could do in the Civil War, right? There were lots of people, I'm sure, who were incredibly good athletes who got just smoked in Gettysburg on the first day, right? So it does not matter what you look like as to whether you can serve your country. I mean, warfare is a team sport, number one.
Yep.
Warfare
Yep.
is a team sport. You do not win a war by yourself, right? You if you have to function as an effective team, you have to leverage technology, you have to understand tactics and positional advantage and like what you can do. And these are all things that have nothing to do with what you look like in, a pair of board shorts.
I tell you, when you look at history, if you do it objectively, it is not the brute strength, especially at the most tactical of levels, hand to hand, whatever you want to call it, small arms, that wins campaigns, that wins wars. It never has been. It has been those that think first, assess, and then act. Think, assess, act, and are able to do it in such a way where the lowest level person in their organization understands. They understand what the objective is. Why does that matter? Because when, again, going back to what we talked about earlier with Medal of Honor recipients, a lot of them were able to act without orders being dictated directly to them because they understood the objective of the mission.
Sure.
That required thinking under pressure.
Yep. Like decentralized command,
Bingo.
explain what, we're getting a little bit into strategies, but what for the listeners who did not go to Olanapolis, like what do we mean when we talk about like decentralized command at like in military operations and command by negation, and what
Right.
does that mean?
So let's back up. When anybody thinks of military, whether they've been in the military or not, they think of the chain of command. So you got someone at the very top telling different layers going down the chain all the way down to the foot soldier what they're supposed to do. And historically speaking, that means that commanding general will be like, hey, do this. And it just gets relayed down like a game of telephone and people act. The naval service in particular has that concept, but we rely more on decentralized command, meaning at the very top, you understand the overall mission and concepts, and then each lower level interprets how they can best do it at their level without having to go back and ask for permission to do it. Why? Because in the age of wood and sail, once that ship left port, you're not talking to it for months. So it has to understand the mission. So captains on ships, commanding officers of ships, were empowered to do whatever is necessary to meet mission. They don't have to reach back. They would do stuff and basically ask for forgiveness later instead of having to do stuff and ask for permission to do it. Command by negation, as you just called it. So as America became a larger military force, a lot of that went into all the other branches of service too, because warfare sped up, the lethality of it sped up. And so now your on the ground, on scene commander has to make decisions that he can't go all the way back up to the 3-star general and be like, hey, can I do this? You got to do it. So that means that everybody at those different layers understand the mission and acts accordingly without having to reach back. There's a line, though, that goes from you independently acting to then you taking initiative to do things that is not in the scope of what you've been given, but you understand the bigger mission and you go do it anyway. And a lot of times those Medal of Honor winners have done that at great risk to themselves because they understood the bigger mission. But rationally, they probably shouldn't have done it. Like, I'm not supposed to jump over and go into this pillbox full of how many other soldiers with weapons, and I'm just like the only dude. Well, we got to take it out because they are killing us literally over here. I got to do it.
One of the a great example of this historically is actually the Battle of Midway, right?
Mhm.
So you've got Midway is an island, right? And the Japanese are coming to invade Midway. It'll give them a stepping stone to potentially take Hawaii at some point. So this is before we had really effective radar. So you got to fly airplanes to go find the Japanese fleet, right? Like we know roughly what direction they're coming from. They're coming from the direction that Japan is, right? But you've got to actually find them in order to drop bombs. So, and I wish I remembered this dude's name. It wasn't Wade McCluskey, but it was one of the Navy pilots. Is taking his wing out, and they're supposed to fly on this one heading, right? Like this one point on the compass. Let's say it's 250 or whatever. And they're flying. He's like, man, I'm just not seeing anything. And he made the decision He sees like maybe something out in the distance, but he was ordered to stay on this heading, but he's like,
Yep.
fuck that. I'm
Yep.
going to go out here and I'm going to look. And lo and behold, the guy finds the Japanese fleet because he understood Commander's intent. Commander's intent was not to have an air wing fly one bearing. Commander's intent was to find the
Find the
Japanese fleet.
Japanese.
Right.
Exactly.
So, that's a concept that gets into empowering kind of the lowest subordinates, so they know that they can act, they have the freedom to act. And getting more into tactics and stuff, that's sort of often a very common knock on like the French and the English at the start of World War II, when the Germans just blitzkrieg. It was like, well, the Germans had decentralized command, the French were radioing everything back to Paris, and by the time Paris figured it out, the Germans were in the next town. So it's an interesting concept.
It's a
And
daring concept.
I wonder if, I would imagine it hasn't trickled down to the tactical level, but I would imagine with the Trump White House, there's pretty serious control at an operational and certainly a strategic level, where
Hmm.
they're doing things like pulling Toni Morrison books out of the Naval Academy library for some fucking reason.
So,
Um,
can we talk about that for a
let's
second?
talk about it, man.
Because it really gets it gets my cross. So I did a Midas touch video about this, but I'm gonna expand a little bit.
Yeah, let's hear it.
How can you expect, especially out of all the service academies, this happens at Navy first and it trickles to the other ones, officers who are going to literally travel the world just by the definition of their job. The United States Navy deploys worldwide when all the other services aren't. Okay. You pull into ports all over the world and you are expected to understand the cultures, the sensitivities, the history, and the strategic value of those countries when you go in. Okay. Why would you limit any literature that could affect your understanding of the greater outside world?
Yep.
You have to be able to think critically. Let me say that again. Think critically in real time about environments that you will find yourself in. So a lot of the books that were pulled deal specifically with colonization and race.
Yep.
Okay? As somebody who has a permanent suntan that went to our school and deployed all over this planet, I'm going to say something that may blow Americans' minds. When you pull into port in Africa and you have blonde hair, blue eyes, there is a natural suspicion of your intent as soon as you step off the ship.
Yeah.
Facts.
Sure.
You don't have to like it. I'm telling you, the 1,000-year history of what's happened on that continent dictates that initial reaction. As opposed to when I step off the brow and I step foot in Africa, there is a difference. There is a difference. Now, that being said, how is that blonde-haired, blue-eyed young ensign supposed to understand the cultural impact of his presence in sub-Saharan Africa unless he reads about it? Or do we just rely on Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump to tell them what Africa is? And if you go with that, it's a shithole area. Let Donald Trump tell it, which is completely untrue. If it was untrue, China wouldn't be all over the place down there. If it was untrue, Russia wouldn't be all over the place down there. If it wasn't untrue, we wouldn't have United States African Command now as of 2008. So spare me. You cannot expect officers, especially officers that can deploy anywhere on this planet at any time, to limit their understanding of the outer world just because it does not paint us in the greatest picture. It's insanity.
And it's clearly just an attack on black people, right? Like
Very
it's
much.
so here's the thing, right? If you wanted to, I don't agree with this, right? But if one wanted to get rid of like the wokeness in the military and have cadets at West Point, midshipmen at the Naval Academy reading books that sort of only presented a positive image of America, and here are some books you should fucking ban. Catch 22. Not I don't remember a single black dude in Catch 22. Catch 22 is about how fucked up the military is and the insanity of war and how it's stupid and insane and all these things, right? Dispatches by Michael Herr. Dispatches is about the Vietnam War. And it's just about how stupid it is. The whole book is just filled with like, this war is ridiculous. A Bright and Shining Lie by John Paul Van, right? Like there's a million books that if one was in the book banning business and your actual concern was like making, a bunch of warriors who can do push-ups and really just believe in the mission, you could get rid of, you don't get rid of Song of Solomon. That's a fucking novel, right? Like
Or
it
Why the
has
Caged
nothing to
Bird
do,
Sings.
it has nothing to do with like strategic military operations or anything like that. I mean, I, by the way, I love Catch 22. I love Dispatchers. I love Bright Shining Light. These are great books. My point is simply that that's insidious thought. If you're a fascist, like Joseph Heller's the guy you should be banning, not,
Right.
Maya Angelou.
Right, right. And that's the point. And here's the other
Yeah,
piece of it too. You're going to be expected to lead people from all various backgrounds.
totally.
And you want to remove any type of literature that could give you a greater understanding of those backgrounds. It's completely insane when you think about it. So I I look at it like this. Between that, and I don't know if you've seen this, but there are rumors that now the Department of Defense wants to change the faculty ratio. So let me give people some background. At the service academies, the faculty that teaches there is roughly 50% civilian, 50% military. They want to change that ratio to 80% military, 20% civilian. Let me explain why this is a dangerous proposition. Military members rotate every 2 to 3 years from duty station to duty station. Okay. And the military members that go to service academies to teach, they have to be trained to teach, and they teach for a limited time, and then they move on to their next assignments. Typically, there are a few that stay, but typically that's what happens. We do that to bring fresh perspectives and experiences from the fleet, from the operational forces, to train the midshipmen and the cadets that are coming. The 50% civilian side is supposed to provide continuity in the academic side of the house, to progress academics with cutting edge things that you find in the rest of academia at universities and colleges all over the world, right? Ensuring you got the best of both worlds. By switching this ratio, one, you're killing some of the professors who are literally the best in the world at what they do: military history, military strategy, thoughts, this, that, and the other. But also, you in your attempt to get rid of wokeness, you eliminate people who teach midshipmen and cadets how to think critically, going back to that original point. And you replace them by guys who are not going to be the best at teaching, but the best at conveying how experience matter. And that's great, but you still have to keep thinking. Military members, especially the officer corps, are not what you see in the movies where we're just like, yes, sir. No, we think hard. And we think a lot. That is why we are sent to the most dangerous things outside of just combat. Humanitarian aid, disaster relief. They send us all over the world to do that because we understand the complexities of problems, people, environment, etc. This just does not happen. It's constant education. It's constant learning. And so when you try to eradicate anything that allows you to continue to think and evolve your thought process, it's a problem. But when you have, again, leadership that believes, if I have a recruiting poster and it's a bunch of dudes looking like Superman, and that's really all that matters, and then I tell them what to think, that's going to win a war, then they have either sucked at leading in war or have no idea what it's like to be in the military. Which is it?
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, like, you can be as jacked as you want, man. A 5.56 round is going to punch through your pecs. Okay. So, it's like, it's just, it's
I,
asinine. I think the military, the service academies are specifically getting targeted by Hegseth,
I agree.
specifically, like, remember, Hegseth's like a Princeton guy. Right?
Yeah. Now, I'm pretty sure he got into it at West Point, but chose not to go.
Really? Interesting.
Yes, he chose not to go. Let me make sure I say that
Yeah, yeah.
again. He chose not to go. So I'm
Yeah,
not one of these guys that are like, oh, he's too stupid. No, he probably could have went. My thing is, why didn't he?
Yeah.
And why
Oh,
is the first places he's gone to visit been service academies?
yeah. Yeah. He probably had some bone spurs, Bobby. You know. But
I mean, I can't stress this enough, right? There have been reasons for Hegseth in particular targeting former military officials, targeting people who have distinguished careers. Miley, Brown, Franchetti, this is not a coincidence.
yeah.
This is not a coincidence at all.
And these are people with, these are people who deployed again and again and again. And while the rest of us, I mean, maybe not you, Bobby, but the rest of us were home kind of, doing things like going to our kids' t-ball games, right? They were the ones in Syria. They were the ones in Iraq. They were the ones in Afghanistan. So don't forget that. I mean, it's a, MAGA likes to say that they're pro-military and they have a monopoly on the veteran vote, and the truth is, the military is not a monotone institution,
Mm-hmm.
and there's all sorts of different folks in there, and they are not pro-military. It's laughable.
Can I just go over real quick? You know, current administration has always said they're the most pro-military or administration in American history, which, everything is always, they're the
Yeah,
most ever.
right.
But really, let's not even talk about the first term and the comments that he made. Let's just focus on what this man has done since he's come back for the second term, right? In order, he has all these executive orders, right? The first one on the first day, right, was, hey, we're going to rescind any order that gives these different groups, these DEI groups, any type of consideration. Number one. Number two, day one, full federal funding across the board. Why does that matter? You had military members that were in training, transiting to and from their different training areas around the world that all of a sudden were locked in place, could not afford because their government credit cards and all this stuff were frozen, stranded, could not get to their next duty station. You had families that had packed up getting ready to move that could not move. They had worked out jobs for their spouses to take over,
Yep.
all delayed because we just going to freeze, federal spending. Direct impact, specifically the federal workers and the United States military. Okay. And then, the transgender thing, that was the next week, January 27th, right? Boom. All of a sudden, you had up to 14,000 people who are like, oh my gosh, am I now out of the military? No heads up, no warning, no way of executing it. Who, by the way, a lot of them had highly technical ratings,
Yeah.
which are hard to get. Okay. So then you go through that, and then Doge comes in and starts going through the Department of Defense. Okay. Why? Because now Doge has started to fire specifically civilians in DOD that have very highly specialized skill sets that keep the country safe. Personal friends of mine at Missile Defense Agency, whose whole job is to protect America from long-range ballistic missile attacks. These people know how to basically knock a bullet with another bullet 50,000 feet in the air, and they're no longer at Missile Defense Agency. Good luck replacing that. Okay?
Well, he's gonna
This
make
is
a
just,
golden dome.
he better come
He's
up with
gonna make a
something.
golden dome. Yeah.
He needs to come up with something. And then, if that wasn't enough, he did all that in February. March rolls around, gut the VA. These guys and girls who 30% of which are veterans too, let's not hire them. Yes, we know that you guys have to wait months on your wait list. We know that when you call, you may be put on hold for hours. I know Biden tried to fix that, but you know what? That costs money. That costs money, and you veterans don't deserve for us to take care of you now, right? And so we literally, in a period, it's been 78 days at the time of this recording that this man's been in office, and we have seen him take away from the military, from veterans. He has taken away access to knowledge. He has taken away access to care. He has taken away access to funding. A lot of the things that have been frozen as far as research funding, as far as cancer, stuff like that, disproportionately affect military veterans and families. I mean, Google search the different things, the cancers that have popped up, the burn pits, the waters on base and stuff like that. Google it. All of these things, since he's come into office, has taken away from veterans and active duty service members. I have gotten calls from people on active duty, like, what are they doing? What can we do? And let me make sure make sure everybody understands this. The active duty service members cannot speak out against the current administration. I see all the time people like, the military needs to set them up. No, we cannot. They cannot. That is why you've never had a military coup in this country, this, that, and the other. They are supposed to be apolitical and silent on what's going on. That's why veterans who are no longer active duty have to be loud. And I'm going to be loud as hell about this, because there has been nothing that this man has signed into executive order action, that has helped servicemen and women and veterans. It's just all take away. And we're getting caught up in the whole shutdown everything, but it disproportionately affects us. And we are already the ones that have served, and in our later years, the most vulnerable.
100%. I mean, the guy, not to mention the fact that his SecDef, his NSA, and, they're just sending their war plans to reporters and then denying that it's confidential what time the F-18s are taking off for the airstrike. So,
Man,
it is bananas. Well, Bobby, that was a fun conversation, man. Guys, we had a little curveball today because we're hoping to one of these weeks bring in Dr. Mel Pender, who is an Olympic gold medalist and a Vietnam veteran, and we're super excited to talk to him, but his plans went awry today. So we'll get him on here soon. And hit us up with any other guests you might think would be fun for a fun conversation. You can make comments in the YouTube, and we'll let us know who might be fun to join. Excuse me. Also, we didn't even talk about the tariffs.
We will definitely talk about that probably next week. Let's see how the markets, quote, settle in. I tell you what, the world is gone crazy because of what we are dictating. It's on us. I hate to break it to you, America.
It's terrible, man.
We are undoing a lot of things that took decades to establish. It took 80 years to establish this, and it's being undone in 78 days, 80 days.
Yeah. Then specifically 72 hours. So, all right, guys, thanks for joining. We will see you next week.
Thanks, guys.